Well, it's March the 4th, and I'm going to do an update on the situation here. We've been treated to some hearings by the Senate, including the FBI Director and the General in charge of the National Guard in Washington, D.C., and the FBI Assistant Director for the I think for counterterrorism or something like that, and some other folks from the government about the January the 6th riots and their handling of it. And I think, of course, I guess first we should start off that this is March the 4th, and I understand the House of Representatives is on very high alert, expecting that in spite of the big fence with the razor wire and the 5,000 National Guard troops protecting the perimeter and 2,000 Capitol Police to protect the interior, they're worried that some rogue militia that is going to come out of hiding from their arrest warrants and come after them. How absurd can you be? I mean, that's ridiculous. But at any rate, by the time most people see this, we'll know that, of course, it really was ridiculous. But anyhow, so if you like these videos, remember to subscribe here and then give me a like so we can increase people's getting to see them. And so let's get into it here. The thing that was pretty noticeable about the director of the FBI was what he didn't know. I mean, every question, like, were we using various surveillance techniques? Were we using geolocation? Well, they might be, but I don't know. Well, did they get data from various financial institutions about who was in D.C. that day? Well, I don't know, but, well, maybe. The thing went on like this about just about every major question you would want to ask. I mean, we have an FBI director that only read the warning that there was going to be trouble there that came out the day before, several days after. And so you get the idea that you have an individual here who seems to be very detached from what's going on. This is, of course, with the assumption he's being 100% frank with us. And of course, since we've learned now that the leader of the Proud Boys actually was an FBI informant, and yet they're supposed to be one of the big culprits in this whole thing, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? They still haven't found any evidence of any Antifa infiltrators, even though apparently there may have been some. As I understand, those individuals disguised themselves as MAGA people and looked somewhat ashamed of themselves. It was what the on-site person reported. So, at any rate, kind of rough to go in that disguise if you're an Antifa, I guess. But of course, I think we all know that it looks like a core group of the group called the Oath Keepers, and maybe the 3% group or whatever may have been the primary instigators, and Senator Johnson had to come back and met with more snark from Klobuchar. But I think that you know, when you get into it, though, it's kind of it's pretty clear cut that a cadre of very motivated people determined to do this managed to hijack an otherwise peaceful protest and turn it into a major riot. That seems to be the upshot of what all the real evidence is. For instance, they asked the lady who was the FBI counterterrorism leader or whatever about this on the second day of hearings, and I listened to here, and that was like, essentially they asked, well, because the Democrats came to want to use the term armed insurrection, and they asked, well, of all the people that were arrested, were any weapons confiscated? The answer was no. The only weapons confiscated were way outside of the event. And the other thing, were any shots fired? The only shot was fired was by the security officer that shot the protester. So in reality, they're really hyping this thing beyond all belief, and it's obviously you know, not very realistic what they're saying. In reality, it really was just a protest motivated by a relatively small cadre of people, no more than a few dozen at most, and the rest of the people were kind of whipped into it by these you know, agitators. And it seems like this Oath Keeper group seems to be the primary group of instigators, and maybe a few others. I don't know who got the idea of them all posing for a group photo, but the possibility of more FBI informants in here is not totally out of the question, I think. Because we all know that these groups of this sort have long been a target of FBI surveillance, going way back at least into the 1960s and the civil rights era, you know, of the Martin Luther King and all that. And so, you know, where you had the church bombings and the various things that occurred back in the 1960s. Yet the Democrats continue to keep throwing around terms like white supremacist, but that's precisely the thing back in the 1960s. Now, to say that there aren't a few stray cats still left like that, of course there are a few. But the idea that this is a major threat to the country is a whole different issue. And I would say that, for instance, even characterizing the Oath Keepers as white supremacists is completely deceptive. I mean, although I'm not an advocate of the group, their basic theme, as I've understood over the years, were they're a group of people that were in like law enforcement and the military that felt they should keep their oath to the Constitution if they were given unconstitutional orders. Why they think they might be given an unconstitutional order and why that's a necessity for them to feel that way is a whole different issue. But of course, remember that the Nuremberg trials and the actual legal policy of the government is not to obey illegal orders, right? Such as, I guess, for instance, if a rogue president ordered the military to go arrest the Congress, for instance, as an example, which I'm sure that most of the critical Democrats there would totally agree that that order should not be obeyed if it had been given. Remember, it was not given. But I'm just trying to illustrate the fact that when they talk about why there might have been some sensitivity to deploying uniformed military early and around the Capitol, and that was what one of the people from the Defense Department was pointing out, that was why there was a slow response. We have to remember that that could have been interpreted a completely different way by the Democrats, right? I mean, let's look at the 6th and the rhetoric the Democrats were using and President Trump was using. How would the appearance of a large number of armed military troops, you know, appear? I think there is that aspect of why they may have been a little bit nervous about doing that till they saw how bad the situation was. And the other thing is that it was revealed during the hearings that there were more than enough off-duty Capitol Police that probably could have handled the situation if they'd been mobilized. So all in all, it just indicates that there was just a lack of appreciation of what might happen, and it's understandable given that the hardcore nucleus of agitators were what caused it. Without their activity, really nothing would have happened other than a peaceful protest and some chanting and stuff. So basically, that's kind of what's come out of the hearing so far. I'm sure it's being spun differently by most of the Democrat-controlled media, but that's the essence I have of watching some of this stuff. And the continual inability of the FBI director to be able to answer questions. After all, it wasn't like this was a surprise interview where we just pulled in there off the street and said, well, we're going to ask you some questions here. I mean, you would think that if he was properly prepared, you would have a staff that would have, have thought up plausible questions that members of Congress, the Senate there would have asked him, and then have done enough research to get honest answers for those things. But obviously that wasn't done. Apparently it looked like he was almost winging the whole presentation. Some of the lower ranking people seem to be a little bit more prepared, I think, perhaps because they were more nervous of their position, not having a 10-year term, and it's kind of a big deal if the president removes them, that kind of thing. So they didn't quite have that level of security, so I presume they want to be a little more read into the subject. But even they didn't know the answers to a lot of these things, which is kind of understandable considering the magnitude of we're approaching 300 arrests now or something like that, and this whole deal. In fact, I think that the criminals in this country are probably feeling a little bit of relief that so much of federal law enforcement is going after the people from January the 6th. So the people are doing all the normal, drug trafficking and other, those kind of federal crimes probably are getting a little bit of a respite here, maybe. But because of the magnitude of the effort that's being thrown against this group from January the 6th. But anyway, that's kind of give you a rundown of what I've observed by listening to spending a few hours listening to some of this material. I again think I'm a little bit still upset about the fact the way they keep throwing white supremacists around like it's a major factor in any of this. Because I don't think that very many people involved in any of it were really motivated by any such thing at all. They were motivated because they believed the election was stolen. Remember, I said they believed. So, but that's a completely different thing and doesn't really have any racial context at all. So, anyway, I guess I'll just kind of wrap this up for today. But I thought this, since I'd spent some time watching these hearings, I thought it might be an interesting summary for people. Until next time.